Hi kids, welcome to Miss Nancy's Bible College for Kids. I really appreciate you tuning in. This is part 4 of Esther, the book of Esther. And today is the day when they have the banquet and the queen tells the king what is on her heart. It's in the Old Testament and it's chapter 7 and 8. Let's get started. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther, the queen. And the king said unto Esther on the second day, at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. There's the third time he said that. Then Esther the queen answered and said, she's finally going to tell him all that's on her heart. If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. And here's why she's telling him this. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Remember all the posts that went through the 127 provinces? And that Haman was going to destroy all the Jews. And Miss Nancy's reminding you of these things or saying them so people can know where we're at if they're just tuning in. But anyway, the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and here's what he found. And Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king. He's reminding the king, standeth in the house of Haman. The king said, Hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman the Jew's enemy unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king. Here's why. For Esther had told what he was unto her. He's my uncle, but he raised me because my parents are dead, so she shared all that. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with her tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews, her own people. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in thy sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come upon my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he had laid his hands upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. Miss Nancy wants to stop right there for a second and say kids are trying to do this with God's word. The King James Bible was approved by a king, sealed with his signet, and they are trying to tear it apart. They're trying to change it. There is no use in that. It's the only Bible with authority. And that goes to the parents and the adults out there. Now, kids, let's get back to the story. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof. And it was written to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies, and rulers of the provinces, which is from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language. In other words, it was made plain for everybody throughout the kingdom to understand. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post. And here's how they got sent back in them days. On horseback, and riders on mules, and camels, and young dromedaries. Well, for a long time, Miss Nancy didn't know, but you kids probably do, the difference in a camel and a dromedary. A camel has 2 humps, and a dromedary has 1. They look a lot alike. Wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them. And I want to stop right there for a minute, kids. This is a little bit above you all, but they're trying to do the same thing to the Jews today that they was then. They're trying to take them out. And this is not God's plan, and he is paying attention. So I just wanted to say that. It's nothing new to them to be attacked. Both little ones and women, and to take the spoil thereof for prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. They're ready now. If everybody leave them alone, they would take out their enemy. But we don't know what the Lord's going to do. So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment. And the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai, here's how Mordecai went out from before the king. He went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And they will one day. They really will. They're God's chosen people. Israel is God's son. And in every province and in every city, wheresoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. There comes that feast again, guys. And many of the people of the land, now pay attention to this, babies, became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Ain't that a great story? Let's see how much of it you retained. So who came to Queen Esther's banquet on that second day? Just King Ahasuerus and Haman. What question did King Ahasuerus ask Esther, Queen Esther? What promise did he give to go with that question? He said, "What's your petition, Queen? I'll give you anything up to half of the kingdom." And that's why Miss Nancy said, I wonder how many Jews was in the land, and if it was half of the kingdom, more or less. I won't know till I get to heaven, but anyway, something I think on. What did Queen Esther tell King Ahasuerus? She said, "King, I want my life for my people's life. Please give me my request." And what details did Queen Esther add? "I and my people are to be destroyed, slain, and to perish. In other words, we're to die. What condition did she add that she would have kept quiet about if it hadn't been like this? She said, if you just made us to be bondmen or bondwomen, she said, I would have kept quiet, but she said, this is not that. And what did King Ahasuerus answer the queen? He said, who is this? Where is he that presumes to do this in his heart? What did Queen Esther reply? This wicked Haman is the one. He was sitting right there before the king. How did this make King Ahasuerus feel? He was very upset, wasn't he? And how did it make Haman feel? He was very scared. But in the king in his rage, what did he do? Where did he go? He went into the palace garden, I imagine, to say a few things, to stomp around, to see what was going on. But then, when the king went out to the palace garden, what did Haman do? He made a request for his life to Queen Esther, who he had tried to destroy with everything in him. And he knew that his life was in her hand. But when King Ahasuerus returned into the place of the banquet of wine, what did he see? He saw Haman fall upon the bed where Queen Esther was. And what did the king say then? He said, will you force the queen right here in the house? Oh, he was mad. As the word went out of the king's mouth, what happened to Haman? They covered his face and took him away. Who was Harbona? He was one of the king's chamberlain. And what did he suggest? He said, you know what? In Haman's house, in his yard, in other words, why don't you hang him on the gallows that he made for Mordecai, king, who spoke so good of you? And what was the king's rule? He said, hang him there. So they did. They hung him on the hangman's loop, I guess, or noose, or whatever you call it, that he had built for Mordecai. On that day, what did the king give to Esther? The house of Haman, didn't he? And why did Mordecai come before the king at this point? Because Esther had finally told her husband, the king, who Mordecai was. And what did King Ahasuerus take off and give to Mordecai? The ring that he had placed on Haman's finger. And anyway, what did Queen Esther set Mordecai over? The whole house of Haman, didn't she? But what question did Queen Esther ask the king when she fell at his feet and she was weeping and begging? She said, please, king, if I found favor, if you trust me, if you love me more or less, she said, please let a rule be made to reverse all this wickedness that Haman has tried to do to my people. So, what did he tell her? Again, he said, you can have anything up to half of the kingdom. Why did King Ahasuerus tell Mordecai that he'd give him the house of Haman? Because that he knew then that Haman had laid his hands on the Jews. And so why did King Ahasuerus tell Mordecai to write to the Jews as he liked? He wanted it to be reversed. He gave the queen her wishes, more or less. And what all did he tell Mordecai to do? He said, you put it in my name, you seal it with my ring. And why was that? So the writing could not and would not be reversed. And when was the king's scribes called? Now this is hard. If you get it, it was in the month of Sivan, S-I-V-A-N. And it was written to all the Jews in how many provinces? 127 provinces. And the special thing about all these letters and posts was that it was in everybody's language, on everybody's level. And anyway, how did Mordecai and Queen Esther feel, and how did all the Jews feel throughout the land when they heard this and read this? They were so happy and filled with joy. What did they do? They had another feast. So I feel like as we learn this story that we need to feast. God knows what he's doing with Israel. And kids, you get a blessing if you remember to pray for Israel and the peace of Jerusalem. So I hope that you will remember this lesson always. And I'll see you next time. Bye, babies.